Good evening, everyone. I have been invited to present this webinar to you guys tonight, and our topic is about positive discipline and behaviour management. So to start off with, I'll just do a really brief introduction of myself. So my name is Suzie Collins, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I have been a registered psychologist since 2009, and I practiced for about 10 years before I decided to go and complete some further study for my clinical endorsement, which I finished in 2022. And I've been working my own private practice since 2013. I also actually work with a whole range of ages and presentations, ages from as young as 3, I guess, right through to some of the elderly age in their 70s and 80s, and probably more if I needed to. I actually really enjoy working with a whole range and having such a broad spectrum of people. It certainly makes an interesting day to be able to hang out with a range of people with different presentations. And I actually work in a rural area, so it's really interesting to, I get to deal with whatever walks in my door, which is a great variety to have. I guess in those ages, I also work with different groups and what comes up for them. So individuals, as well as doing some couples work, or also working with children and their parents and helping them to build better relationships. And particularly I use a TheraPlay model with that. But today's model, we're actually focusing on a different one. We're not talking about TheraPlay. We're actually going to talk about the P positive parenting solution. So it's a pretty well-known parenting program, P, and it comes in a whole variety of options. But I'll talk a little bit more about that actually at the end if you want to do some more exploration around what P is. But for today, P, I'm going to cover the 4 key domains that P actually covers. So the first one is actually about positive parenting. That's the first step. So if we want to really make sure that we're having a really good relationship with our children, we have some lovely positive parenting going on, then we're less likely to encourage or encounter, I guess, some of those misbehaviours that we'll talk about as well. So I'm going to talk initially about how to do the positive parenting aspect. Then we're going to just talk a little bit about helping our children develop and what sort of things are going to impact on the way that they develop. So we'll jump into that shortly. Then we'll also get into how do we manage the misbehaviour. That's always the part that gets parents' attention. How do I manage that tantrum in the supermarket? Or how do I support the sibling rivalry that happens at home where they're having a bit of conflict? So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then the last section that we'll cover is actually doing a little bit of planning ahead. How do we consider and plan towards some of those high-risk situations that might happen for us? So to start off with, we're going to have a look at this positive parenting aspect. So I guess the first part about having positive parenting, or the key aspect, is to actually make sure we've got this lovely, safe and interesting environment for our kids. So we want to make sure it's safe from any dangers that might be going on. So whether that's some other people or whether that's just some physical things like hot stoves or water and other dangers similar to that. And then the second part is making sure that we keep them busy. Children love to be busy, they love to be involved, they love to learn. And when we can provide that really interesting environment for them, they can flourish really well. And we want to also make sure that we can support them to develop their language and thinking or cognitive skills, making sure they can maintain appropriate attention for the age that they're at, so that they can build independence. And I guess that's our goal as parents, isn't it? To create these independent young people who can go off in the world and be themselves. So keeping the environment interesting. We also want to create a really positive learning environment. So we want to make sure as parents that we're actually available for our child. So if a child wants to come and engage with you, it's really important that when they do approach you, that you stop what you're doing and actually spend some time with them. And I think what we all notice when we actually do that it's usually only a minute or so that they actually want your attention for, and then they're happy to go off and engage in whatever it is that they're doing or go and find something else to do. So being available for your child is really important. The second point is encouraging learning for themselves. We want to make sure that they're having the opportunity to learn without us actually telling them how to do stuff. It's about just doing enough for them to enable them to do it themselves. And the third thing we want in a positive learning environment is to notice good behaviour, making sure that they're giving choices and pay attention to them when they need it, and paying attention to them when they do make good choices, and praising them for that. We also want to ensure that we are doing some assertive discipline. So the assertive discipline is actually a little bit more about managing the misbehaviours in an acceptable way. We want to make sure we're doing it respectfully for both the child and the parent that's involved. We want to make sure that we can make really quick decisions in those moments and be able to act straight away. And then we also want to ensure that we actually react the same way each time. That consistency is so important for young brains and how they develop. And if a child knows what to expect, then things are going to go much calmer. It's when the unexpected happens for them and in their brain and their expectations, that is where some dysregulation can occur for children. Assertive discipline also involves making sure that we stay calm. So we want to make sure we avoid the yelling or name calling or threats or hitting. We want to make sure that we can be calm. And we also want to help them to learn some responsibility. And that helps them to also be aware of others' needs as well as developing their own self-control. And as I mentioned, we also want to make sure that we react in the same way every time, less likely to have those behaviour problems because children like consistency and predictability. Positive parenting involves making sure we have realistic expectations. Every child or individual, for that matter, learns and develops at a different rate. And they have different skills at different ages for those different children. So let's have a look at each of those. So problems usually arise when we expect too much from the child or when we expect perfection. Excuse me. No child is good all the time, and we shouldn't expect them to be. We all have bad days just like children do. Sometimes they take longer than expected to learn, or they might just be having a bad day, and that's okay. It's important to make sure that we can understand where the child is at and learn when they're ready to learn the next skill. Just because a sibling might have done it or a peer is doing a particular skill doesn't necessarily mean that our child is ready for that particular skill. So let's allow them to develop at their own rate, and then you'll learn when they can develop their next skill. I think we also have to, as parents, we need to make sure we have realistic expectations of ourselves as well. We all want to be good parents, but trying to be perfect parent will only lead to us all being disappointed or frustrated in ourselves or the people around us because we're frustrated. So be realistic. Every parent makes mistakes and everyone learns through experience. Okay. And again, this is still focused on you as the parent, and it's so important to make sure that we take care of ourselves. Parenting is so much easier when our own personal needs are being met. So if you need to feel close to someone and you need to feel understood, children are just like that as well. So making sure your needs are being met. We as adults also need time with friends and time for ourselves. And we also need time for the activities that we like to enjoy. So making sure that you're doing that for yourself. And being a good parent doesn't actually mean that your child actually takes over your life. So we want to make sure that your needs are being met so that you can meet the needs of your child and be available to them. And it's certainly much easier to stay calm and manage their misbehaviours if your needs are being met. So don't forget to look after yourself in all of this. So there are the things that are really important around the positive parenting aspects of things. So let's move into having a look at how do we actually help our child to develop then. So why do our children behave as they do? So all behaviour actually has a purpose or some sort of function. And it's really important for us to be aware of what that might be. And sometimes it can be really tricky to determine what that function or purpose might be. So there might be also some key factors we need to consider about what that function might be. So the first part is we're going to have a look at the genetic makeup of the child. So each person, each child, and each parent whose genetics they've inherited have a variety of different temperaments. Some children need more attention than others. Some children are what we call sensitive or emotional, so they're a little bit more in tune or aware of their emotions than some other children are. And some just have more energy, are just more active than others. And that's okay. We want some variety in our children. We don't want them all the same, but we need to consider what are some of those genetic factors that might be impacting about a child's behaviour and why it might be different to what we expect it to be. We also need to consider the health. Perhaps there's some hearing concerns. Is that maybe what's going on around some misbehaviour? They're not understanding some instructions or directions that they've been told. So checking some hearing concerns. They might actually not be eating at any given day or time because we all know that then that's going to have an impact on their energy and their learning abilities, on their listening and their attention. Or they may actually just be a little unwell, and whether that's a one-off thing or it might be a child who's experiencing some chronic illness, and that too can fluctuate from day to day. So just having some awareness of some of those physical health things that might be contributing to their behaviour. Another big part that will be a factor in children's development and their behaviour is the family environment. So what's actually going on around them? That's a really key part. And I guess when we think about the nature versus nurture aspects of things, the genetic aspect is the nature aspect of that, and this family environment or what's going on around them is where that nurturing aspect comes from. So we need to have a look at whether or not, as parents, we might actually be accidentally rewarding our child for their poor behaviour. So often attention is the reward that we give accidentally for behaviour. And it might be something as simple as seeing them do something that they probably shouldn't be doing and smiling or laughing at it. Or we might even actually start explaining too much. So we're sitting there and giving them lots of attention. Or we might even give them material rewards for some misbehaviour. And it's not because, we're rewarding it, but sometimes the child might perceive that. So we have to be mindful of any accidental rewards of attention. The other thing that might occur is these escalation traps. So as children learn to get louder and more persistent to get the things that they want, where are they learning that from? Do we actually do the same thing? Do we, if a child's not doing what we ask them to do we yell? Do we get louder? Do we keep asking over and over and over before, something else happens to try and get them to do the behaviour that we want? So if we're modelling that sort of behaviour, that escalation of things, then the children are likely to learn that as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about escalation later on in the presentation around how we can reduce escalation of incidents. The other environmental factor that we need to consider is perhaps we're actually ignoring good behaviour. So if a child is actually doing the right thing, sometimes we just sort of leave them to do it and finish what it is that they're doing. But it's actually really important to make sure we capture and notice the good things that they're doing. So again, those environments of things that we're doing accidentally, if we're ignoring the good behaviour, we're sometimes then giving them the attention for the wrong behaviour as well. Helping children, continuing here. So we have to be really mindful about where we're watching others. Sorry, let me start that again. We have to be really cautious of how they're watching other people. Children are really great watchers. If they see yelling to get what they want, then they're going to start yelling. Or they may learn things like, how not to clean up, or they might learn swearing from other people, or hitting, or they might even learn, particularly as they get a little bit older, that, people drink or they smoke when something frightening happens, or they're scared about something. And so they learn by watching those around them. So we have to be really mindful of what we're modelling. Some of the other things to consider is giving instructions. I think we all fall into this trap. Sometimes we give too many instructions. And when we do that, it generally sets them up to fail. And then that leads to problems. Sometimes we give too few instructions. And so we don't give enough information for them to actually do the task well. And again, then we find that we're falling into more problems around that. Or sometimes the expectations that we talked about earlier, sometimes the tasks that we ask or the instruction that we give is actually too hard for the child to actually complete. And if it's beyond their capacity, it's going to be really tricky for them to, develop well. Or bad timing. Particularly when we're asking our children to do tasks when they're busy. We don't like being interrupted when we're doing a task. Children too don't like to be interrupted. So sometimes our instructions are just poorly timed. Or sometimes our instructions just aren't clear enough. Sometimes we make offhanded comments like, "Oh, stop that," or "Don't be silly." And what does that actually mean? When a child's perhaps jumping on the bed and a parent says, "Don't be silly." They're often left there going, "Oh, what's the silly bit? Was it because I had my tongue hanging out, or I had a funny look on my face? What is the silly behaviour that's going on?" It's not necessarily the jumping on the bed that they're going to take that as. So not being clear. And sometimes when we have confusing body language, and that's part of that incidental or that accidental attention. Are we smiling and laughing, but also telling them to stop that? That can be really confusing for kids. We have to be mindful of the emotional messages that we're giving out. Are we saying negative things about our children? And actually naming the children as the bad thing rather than the behaviour itself. If we're saying, "Gosh, you're naughty," as opposed to sometimes you make some poor choices and your behaviour is not the best option, or it's naughty behaviour rather than a naughty child. I think the other emotional message we need to be careful about is whether or not we make them feel guilty. Some parents use that term, "When Dad gets home, I'm going to tell him what's going on." Or, "What would Dad say when he got home and he saw this going on?" We know that sometimes that guilt or shame can work initially, but in the long term, it actually creates anger and resentment within the child, and that actually makes them feel bad about themselves. And that's not a path we want to get down to. It doesn't lead to independent and well-regulated children. We need to check in around punishment. And we'll talk a little bit around the differences between punishment versus discipline. And we'll talk a little bit more about discipline coming up. But I just want to talk about punishment. So punishment actually doesn't work. It's not the same as discipline. And it usually occurs in anger, as a response, as a crisis response. And it's usually some sort of threat that's generally not carried out. And it's also pretty inconsistent. So we need to be mindful around whether or not we're making a choice in ourselves when we're managing our child's behaviour around, are we choosing some sort of punishment, or are we actually making a conscious decision to provide some discipline for the child. And we also have to consider our beliefs as parents and what our expectations are. I think we've often thrown around the saying, oh, they'll grow out of it, or it's just a phase, or they're just doing it on purpose. They just want attention, or the other, it's all my fault. I'm the bad parent. Let's be really mindful of the beliefs and expectations we're putting out there. There are some expected behaviours of children, but there's also some ways to manage that. We don't have to have the terrible 2s or the terrible 3s or whatever it is that's the phase that we might put it down to. Sometimes it's just about, how can I manage this environment differently to support my child so that we don't have the terrible 2s. Okay. So, we talked about family environment, but there's also some other factors that we need to consider around what might be impacting on our child and their behaviours. So maybe we can have a look at the parents' relationship themselves. How's that going? Is there some conflict going on in that relationship? Is there just some stresses going on, whether that's from external sources or even from within the family? What about parents and their feelings? How are they managing those? How do they model what their feelings are or experiences? And again, are there some stresses going on? But outside the core family or even extended family, there's some community that children live in as well. And we have to take all of those systems into that context into account for children's behaviour. So let's consider the friends that they're hanging out with. They're likely to be engaged in some sort of childcare centre, as you all are here. And so we have to consider what sort of influences that are happening from their friends around them. I think what's interesting about friendships is that, every family has their own set of values of what's important. And although lots of values are important, they're different priorities for different families. And what might be really important for one family might not be for another. And so that can become a bit of a conflict between peers when they're hanging out together. We also need to have a look at school and the successes that might be occurring there, whether that's at an academic level or just any sort of skill. It's always important to consider how the child might be feeling around how they're developing, and often we make comparisons to the other children. Are they feeling like they haven't learnt a skill, or they're not good enough at that? Or, I'm not a good maths person, or I'm not a good reader. We need to consider how those successes are playing on the children and how that makes them feel, and then what they're doing about that, like how they're reacting or acting out in relation to that. And we also need to consider media and technology and how that works. And this is my little thing that I always like to talk about. I know there's some research out there that talks about children are not being in front of devices until they're 2 years of age. And I guess when I talk to lots of families, they're not really understanding about why that's the case. And I guess I wanted to share what one of the arguments are around that. And it's actually around emotional regulation and how children develop that skill. So if you've got a child who is less than 2, usually they create connection with another person through facial expressions. And so, we've all had that little tiny baby who we stand over and we goo and we gar at and we smile at, and they smile back at us. And they learn then, look, when I smile at my parent, then, they're going to smile back at me. And they learn how to do that reciprocal social engagement process. When we put social media in place, or we put any sort of screen in place, whether it's Peppa Pig or the Wiggles or some other child-friendly show, when the child smiles or laughs, and when the character in the show doesn't actually smile or laugh back, the child then goes, oh, hang on, I didn't make a good connection with that person. Maybe I didn't do that properly. Maybe I laughed at the wrong thing. And so it changes the way that they feel about themselves and how they fit into the world. So the lack or the suggestion of not having screens in front of children of that age, younger than 2, is more about the skill in being able to build those social skills and those connections between people. It's not generally about other things. So that was my little tidbit around that. And that's my point on the slide about poor responses. And the other thing to consider about any sort of media and technology is what else are they watching? We also know, like, little things like the news. If parents are having the news on all the time and there's lots of talk about a particular topic, children are hearing this, or they might be seeing a particular video clip. And as adults, we know that it's the same clip being played over and over again. But for a child, they don't necessarily have those cognitive skills to be able to differentiate between that. And so, again, it just creates some, I guess, some reasons to have some poor regulation around their emotions. So we just need to be mindful of the impact that media and technology might be having on their little developing brains. Okay, so there are all the things to consider about a child that might be misbehaving and how we might support that. About their development. Sorry, we'll talk about misbehaviour shortly. But these are some things that you actually can do that can be really helpful. So one of the big things that you can do to support good development in children is to actually spend some time with your child. And there's some really lovely research that's out at the moment that actually talks about if you can do 10 minutes 5 days a week doing something that the child wants to do, you'll have some really lovely connections and quality time with your child. So it's 10 minutes, 5 days of the week. So it's not every day of the week, and it doesn't even actually have to be across the 5 days. So if you have a couple of days where you do 20 minutes, that's totally okay too. But the evidence is talking about that time across, I guess, ideally across the 5 days. But any quality time's got to be good. Making sure that you're actually talking with your child. And I think the key part about this is actually talking with the child. I think as parents, sometimes we talk at children, telling them what to do and what's happening, or asking them about their day, but more so out of that, not necessarily thinking about what the response might be and how you might support your child with how their day might have gone. So making sure you're really sitting down and having reciprocal conversations backwards and forwards, not just asking the generic, how was your day, and not really listening to the answer. But it's really important for us to show affection and nurturing the environment or the child in that respect. Showing affection is really important for young children. We want to make sure you praise that child for all those good things that they do and all their achievements, and even actually just for all their attempts and their effort to do things. They don't have to be successful. We can praise their attempts and efforts. Give your child attention. Really important to do that. As we talked about before, there are different genetic makeups of children. Some require more attention than others, and that can be really difficult for some people. But all children need attention. Actually, all people or humans need attention. So make sure you give that to them as they need it. As we also said right at the beginning, have interesting activities. Have different corners. That's what I love about childcare centres. They always have different corners and activities all set up. It's all structured and planned, and children can just sort of wander around them at their leisure. But you can also set those things up at home. Have different corners and activities, and move them around. Put some of the toys away and bring them back out. Rotate them around. That's always nice to create some interest for kids. Making sure that we're also teaching new skills. And new skills, and we can do that through all the developmental stages that children have. We know when it's about teaching colours versus numbers versus block building, But skills can also include play, making sure you're playing with your children, and play includes social interaction. So lots of kids are really good at playing independently and parallel with each other. So they'll play in the sandpit, but they're not playing together. They're just playing on their own. So it's really important to teach them the skill about how to play together. But that's for another time. That's not for this presentation. We want to make sure we're setting a really good example. That's that modelling that we've talked about. And incidental teaching is amazing. As soon as something comes up, or they're talking about a different topic, or there's a situation that's come up, then use those opportunities to teach them how they could react, teach them about the emotions that they're experiencing and that they're totally okay to have that experience, and teach them how they can support themselves or something different that they could do in that time for that particular incident if it happened again. There's some really good things that you can actually do with your children. And I really like this particular task as well. So this is actually a little bit around the skill building aspect, and it's the use the ask, say, do method. So the first part is to ask, what's the first step that might need to happen? And so the example I've used in this is brushing your teeth. So what's the first step we need to do to brush our teeth? And so we ask that question of the child and we wait for a response. And then you say, that's right. Or if it's not quite right, say, that's not quite right. First, we put the toothpaste on a brush. And then the do section is, if they're having trouble, give enough help as they need to do it themselves. And so perhaps that's not actually putting the toothpaste on the brush for the child, but perhaps it's just guiding their hand to do that. Or maybe it's just squeezing from one end while they're holding the toothpaste. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So it's not about doing things for them. It's about keeping that independence or building that independence to be able to allow them to do it themselves, but just helping enough. And then when they've done that, making sure you actually praise their cooperation and their success, or at least their attempts around that. And then we also want to make sure that we repeat that framework for each step. So that's the first step. What do we do next? What do we do next? That's right, or that's not quite right, and helping them with it. So that's a really simple skill that you can do to continue to help your child to develop well. So the next section is actually about the managing the misbehaviour side of things. But let me say that if we're putting all of those other things into place first, that positive parenting and understanding the development of our child and where they're at and what they need, this part becomes a little bit easier. Now, talking about managing misbehaviour, this is where my little disclaimer is. So there's actually a couple of different schools of thought about how we should manage the behaviour of our children. So one is a real focus on attachment styles and the relationship between primary caregiver and the child. And another one is based on behaviour and that idea that if we put consequences and rewards in place, then we can adapt or change the behaviour of the child. So this particular presentation is actually going to focus on the behavioural framework, not around the attachment one. And I guess I just want to reassure you that there'll be some parents who might actually not feel comfortable about some of the steps in this particular way of managing behaviour. And I guess I just want to say that that's okay. This is just one way of doing it, and it doesn't have to be the way that suits you. And if it doesn't suit you, it might be worth considering other ways of managing behaviour and perhaps the attachment focused one. And I'm sure there'll be another presentation around that in the future. But this particular model is around the behavioural aspects of things. So I hope that this will sit comfortably for you. And when we look at the behavioural aspect, this is about children being able to know and learn limits, and then to also be able to manage their emotions when things don't go as they expect. So when we have a look at managing misbehaviour, there are 4 key areas that we're going to cover. So the first one is actually around setting clear ground rules. The second one then is using directed discussion and perhaps even some planned ignoring for minor problems. We're going to talk about how to give clear and calm instructions. And then we're also going to talk about how do we back up those instructions with logical consequences. And perhaps it might then also be with some quiet time, or it may require a timeout, depending on the level of the behaviour. So let's have a look at each of those. So the first one is actually about setting those clear ground rules. And I guess what's really important is children need to know what's expected of them. Brains are actually designed to work well when expectations are being met. And when a brain knows what to expect that's going on in the environment, things run much smoothly. But it's when that expectation is changed or is not met, or is different from last time or some previous patterns, that's generally when that dysregulation occurs and that misbehaviour is what we see. So it's really important as a family that we actually have a few simple ground rules. Only 4 or 5 is helpful. Don't have too many because it gets too overwhelming for children. And we also need to make sure that our rules tell the child what to do, not what not to do. So rather than saying we don't run in the house, we walk in the house. Instead of the rule being no yelling, we use a pleasant voice inside. And rather than, no kicking, we keep our hands to ourselves or our feet to ourselves with that example. So really important to tell a child what to do. And we want to make sure that we involve the whole family in the rules as they're made. Okay, everyone needs to be aware of what the rule is. And actually, kids are really good at coming up with their own rules, particularly as they get a little bit older. But initially, it's always important for parents to sort of start with what those rules are and keep talking to the kids around whether or not some of those rules might need changing. So we want to make sure that we have a small number of rules. We want to make sure that the rule is fair and that it's actually easy to follow. We want to make sure that rules can be followed up with consequences, and it's really important to make sure you talk to the child about what the consequences will be if the rule isn't followed. And like I said before, the rule should say what to do, not what not not to do. Okay, so the next one is using directed discussion for rule breaking. So this is actually about making sure that the child is aware of what the rule is that they've broken, or making sure that when we're actually sharing an instruction, that we're actually being able to share that with the child in the right way. So sometimes they just need a quick reminder of the rule to make sure that they can keep practicing the behaviour the right way. So we need to make sure we get the child's attention. We need to make sure that we tell them the problem and why it's a problem. And we also need to make sure that we actually get the child to say what they should have done instead. And if they can't remember, then that's okay. We just have to remind them what they should have done. So what was the rule? And then we get them to practice the desired behaviour. It's actually really good if we can get them to do it twice. So here's the example. So Jenny, you ran through the house. You might break something or hurt yourself. What's our rule about moving in the house? Yes, walk in the house. Now you show me the right way to move into the house. Go back to the door and start again. That's much safer. And I like it when you walk in the house. So although sometimes it's a really long sentence to do, that's our job as parents to actually remind them of the rule and helping them to support working their way through it. So we got the child's attention, we told them what the problem was and why it's a problem. So they broke the rule and they might break something or hurt themselves. We want to get the child to say what they should have done. So what's our rule about moving through the house? And in this example, they got it. Or maybe we just had to remind them that we walk in the house. and then send them back to practice and do it again. So making sure we're having that directed discussion when a rule is broken. This is about using planned ignoring, and we only use this for minor problems. So this is actually about deliberately not paying attention to the child when they're doing a minor problem behaviour. So it can be pretty useful when a child is actually trying to get a reaction from you about something that they're, when the child's actually just trying to get a reaction from you. And sometimes it's really simple just to ignore the behaviour and what's happening. And it can just help them to learn that this behaviour actually doesn't get your attention of what they're trying to do. And perhaps then when they've stopped doing the problem behaviour, you can then give them the attention by thanking them for changing or doing the right thing. So the actual ignoring involves not looking or talking with the child at all. It may actually get worse initially, but just keep ignoring it. And if you need to, turn and walk away. But it's really important to make sure that you stay calm and ensure that your body language stays calm. And we talked earlier about in that development, we want to make sure that your body language is matching what you want from the child. So making sure that's all staying calm. And then as soon as that problem behaviour stops and the child behaves well, that's that praise and giving them the attention that they need. So it's okay to do some planned ignoring as long as you're doing it deliberately for them. The fourth part about managing misbehaviour is giving clear and calm instructions. So, you know, it's not reasonable to expect that a child is actually going to do exactly what we ask them when we ask them to do it. So when you want your child to actually do something, try to sort of let them finish what they're doing before you start giving them instructions of what to do, or perhaps going over and getting their attention first and letting them know they can do it when they're finished this particular task. So let's go through some of the steps that we need to do for calm and clear instructions. So first of all, let's get close and gain the child's attention again. Stop what you are doing, go over to the child, get down on their level, and perhaps even use their name to gain their attention. Then secondly, tell your child what to do. I want to make sure we're doing that in a calm voice and say exactly what it is that you want. So the example here is, Marcus, it's time for dinner. Come to the table now, please. Now, if you want them to stop doing something, make sure you tell them what to do. So the example here is, Theo, stop hitting your brother. Keep your hands to yourself. So really important to make sure you tell them what to do, not just what not to do. Give your child time to actually cooperate. So we should actually wait 5 seconds after we've given instruction for the child to actually respond and do what you've asked them to do. So stay close and just watch. And 5 seconds can actually seem like a really long time, but it's important to stop and count to 5. And then when they do cooperate with the tasks, thank them for doing what you asked. So if Marcus got to the table and he's sitting there, thanks, Marcus, for coming to the table as soon as I asked you to. Repeating your instructions. So if we want a child to start doing a task, we should actually only repeat the instruction once. So we say it the first time and then we repeat it. And then if the child doesn't cooperate within the 5 seconds, then we're going to put something else in place. We're going to follow it up with a consequence. However, if you're asking your child to stop doing something, we should not actually repeat that. We should only ask them to stop a behaviour by asking them once. And then we follow it up with the consequence that goes with that. So let me say that again. If you want them to do something, you can ask the first time and repeat it. But if you want them to stop doing something, we only ask it the one time before the consequence is put in place. So let's have a quick look at some of those consequences that we can do. And Triple P really focuses on logical consequences. And sometimes this can be really hard to come up with in the moment. But it's really important to make sure it has some level of fitting with what's going on. So, for example, if they don't follow a rule or instructions, the consequence of taking something away might be, take the toy or the activity that's at the center of the problem away. Um, and consequences should actually be really brief, so between 5 and perhaps up to 30 minutes, depending on the age of the child. We'll talk about that shortly. But consequences can get longer if it's the same day, so if the same behaviour is continuing on the same day. But if it continues over days, we should take it back to the first. Again, that probably is a little dependent on the age of the child. So if a problem's actually happening, here are a couple of steps to follow. So the first one is take away the activity as soon as it happens. Ignore all the complaining, don't argue about it. Say why you're taking it away. You're not sharing the Lego, I'm putting it away for 5 minutes. Or perhaps you're still arguing over that game, so it's going off for 10 minutes. Or maybe you're still not keeping the sand in the sand pit. You must stay out of the sand pit for 5 minutes. So take the activity away straight away. And then the second part is making sure you return the activity. Keep to your agreement. When the time is up, return the activity to the child so they can actually practice doing the right thing. And to even prevent it from happening again, you can even ask the child to actually solve the problem. So perhaps if they're not sharing and the Lego goes back, ask them, what can we do to make the sharing a little bit easier here for you two? And ask them to solve the problem. If we need to use another consequence, we can, if that's necessary. And if it continues, you can follow up with those longer times. Or you might actually then use what Triple P referred to as quiet time. So let's have a bit of a look at what quiet time actually is. So quiet time is a really short, effective way for children to learn appropriate behaviour. So if they're not following instructions, have them sit on the edge of the activity just for a short time. So it's usually in the same room, exactly where the problem occurred, and it's just for a short period of time. So the recommendation through Triple P is that for a 2-year-old, quiet time should just be for 1 minute. For 3 to 5-year-olds, for 2 minutes. And then for that 5 to 10-year-old, a maximum of 5 minutes. During quiet time, there's actually no talking to the child at all. It's actually quiet time. But when the quiet time is up, it's about encouraging them to rejoin the activity. If you're going to use quiet time, it's really important to make sure that you actually introduce this to the family before you use it the first time. Explain what quiet time actually is. Actually show the child what will happen and take them through the steps. So, the steps will be, if you can't do your right behaviour, we're going to have quiet time. I'm going to take you and you're going to sort of just sit next to the sandpit, or you're just going to sit on the edge of the mat where everybody else is playing. You get to stay in the room. Explain the rules of quiet time. And the rule is that the time starts once the quiet happens. So if there's any complaining about not being able to continue with the activity, once they're quiet, that's when that time starts. And just making sure that they understand that they have to be quiet for that set amount of time. They can be a bit tricky for young people because they don't have much concept of time, but they will learn it, particularly once you've started it and you remember to bring them back. I think as parents, we're not always very good at teaching our kids time. We say things like, I'll be with you in 5 minutes, or I'll be there in 1 minute, and we don't actually stick to that rule that we did. But when we do quiet time, it's really important to make sure you stick to the contract that you had with your child. So this is a little bit more detail around how we do those misbehaviour steps. So the first one is tell your child what to do. So act quickly, move close to the child, get their attention, and tell them exactly what to do. Daniel, stop pushing your sister, play gently with her, and praise them if they do what you ask. Follow up your instruction with the quiet time if they haven't done that instruction that you gave them. And if the problem continues, tell the child what they've done wrong. You have not stopped pushing your sister, and the consequence now is quiet time. So be calm and firm and take them if necessary, and ignoring any of that complaining and remembering not to argue with them. Remind your child of the rule as you put them into quiet time. We're supposed to keep our hands to ourselves. And remind them that the quiet time is for a set amount of time, and at the end of that, they can join back into the activity again. So after quiet time is over, again, don't actually talk to them about what happened beforehand. Just bring the child back to the activity, or find them something else to do if they don't want to go back to that. Yeah. And then again, if they are continuing to do it, then you can repeat your instruction around what they need to be doing. And we can put more consequences in place, and we'll talk about the next one shortly. And then when they do go back and they are engaging well with the play, we can praise the child for behaving well as soon as we can after the quiet time. So we can also then use the timeout strategy, and this is probably for more serious behaviour. And this is actually a positive strategy for everyone involved. It can help the child learn to have some self-control and determine what behaviours are acceptable, but actually also helps the parent stay calm. And sometimes we need to have our space as well. So if you start to become angry, or you risk losing your temper, or even perhaps hurting the child, we want to make sure that we create a little bit of space between you and the child so that doesn't happen. And timeout is actually similar to quiet time, but it is actually about taking the child away from everyone. So it's important to have a planned space for timeout. Some people would suggest a bathroom or a hallway or the laundry. It can be whatever space you choose, but we need to make sure that it's safe. So lock away any dangerous items, any chemicals or things if you're in the bathroom or the laundry. And we want to make sure it's a space that's got plenty of light and air flowing through it. And we also want to make sure that it's free of any interesting activities. We don't need it full of toys or activities and things for the child. And I think what's also really important about timeout is that we also shouldn't do it in the child's bedroom. I think bedrooms are a place for children to have as a safe space for them, a space they can go if they need some quiet time. But not quiet time as a consequence, but just their own space. And we don't want to use their bedrooms as a place of punishment, a place of timeout. So have it as a really neutral space in the house. We also want to make sure that when the child is in timeout, that we're not giving them any attention, even if they call out. And this time is about calming down and being quiet. Again, it's for a set amount of time, and it's the same time as quiet time. So again, 2-year-olds, just the 1 minute, 3 to 5-year-olds, 2 minutes, and 5 to 10-year-olds, a maximum of 5 minutes. So it's not a long time by any means. And again, when you put the child into timeout, making sure that we've explained to the child what the process is beforehand, and when we do put them in timeout, that we're making sure that we're reiterating what they didn't do well, and explain what will happen in the timeout space and how it will work, and talk them through the steps, and check that the child knows that they need to be quiet in that timeout, and that the timer will start once they have been quiet. So here's the steps to include in that. So tell the child what to do, back up your instructions with timeout, remind your child of the rules, and ignore the behaviour in the timeout space. Now, many parents will talk to me about that timeout actually doesn't work. And I guess the TripleP suggestions about making sure that timeout is effective are these 3 steps. So we want to make sure that the child stays for the making sure that the child actually participates in timeout by following the rules of what timeout actually is, and for the recommended time. So timeout is about staying quiet for that recommended time and making sure that you as the parent actually stick to that time and the rules of that. And sometimes if they don't stay in timeout, it's about continuing to return them to that space, and that the timing doesn't start until they've stayed there for that required time and quiet. The other thing that we need to ensure to be effective is that we need to be consistent with it. So every time there's a misbehaviour, and particularly those bigger misbehaviours, we need to make sure that we're using timeout consistently. And we don't want to just use it as a threat or a sometimes thing. We need to be really consistent. And we need to ensure that the child calms down before starting the time. Often, sometimes parents let them out while they're still upset, and that just reinforces that that their emotions aren't appropriate. And that's not what we want. We want to make sure that the child is actually calm before we're starting the process, and that they're okay. So we need to make sure that all noises and poor behaviour actually stops. And then they're in a better space to manage their emotions, and they can calm down. And it also gives you, the parent, that space to calm down as well. I hope that actually made sense to you guys. The next section that we're going to talk about is actually about the planning ahead. So again, if we've got all of the above stuff in place, so that positive parenting, that knowing what's going on for your child and managing misbehaviours appropriately, then, we'll also already notice a really big improvement in our child's behaviour. But then there's some really high risk times and places that can be really difficult for managing. And so sometimes they're places that aren't designed for children. There's too many things to do at once, or there's too much pressure to get things done too quickly. It might be going shopping, or it might be visiting people, waiting in line, a whole range of circumstances that are a little bit more high risk for poor behaviour. And so if we can do a little bit of planning, that goes a long way to making those high risk situations a little easier. So let's have a bit of a look at some of those ways that we can do that. Sorry, I will do this quickly so that we've got some time for some questions at the end. So high-risk activities. So the best way to manage those is to just have some planned activities and be prepared for it. So making sure you get prepared in advance, have everything you need, any activities organised, bag packs, food prepared, all of those things done early, and try and plan any of these high-risk situations around existing routines like meal times and sleep times. We want to make sure that we talk to the child about the rules before we go. We want to prepare them for what might happen, and what your expectation is of the child. And we want to be really clear about what those are. So use a quiet voice, or keep your hands to yourself, or stay in your seat, and ask the child to actually repeat back what those rules were, and making sure that you actually repeat the rules again just before you enter the high-risk situation. We want to make sure that you choose those interesting activities. So again, leading up to any high-risk situation, sit down with the child and work out what are some of the interesting activities you might be able to take with you. And we want to make sure we take opportunities to actually have some fun with our kids around some of those interesting activities, and use those moments for any incidental teaching as well when you're out in those situations, and making sure that you can use that to keep the child interested and playing for longer. Planning ahead, make sure you use rewards and consequences. But it's really important to make sure that when you create the rules and you talk to the child about what the rules are and the expectations are for that particular high-risk situation, that it's really important to make sure you also talk to them at the same time about what the rewards are when they do the good behaviour or the expected behaviour, and also talking about what the consequence will be for the misbehaviour or if they're not following the rules. So making sure you're doing all of those things at the beginning. Expectations of rules, what the reward will be, and what the consequence will be. And then after you return from the high-risk situation, it's really important to make sure you have follow-up conversations with the child about how things went, and praise them if they followed the rules and the expectations, and perhaps maybe just explaining if there was one that they might have forgotten. So you might say something along the lines of, you did really well staying close to me in the shop today. Next time, let's see if we can remember to use our quiet voice. So making sure you have those conversations. And just some really simple family survival tips here. So when we're actually, I guess it's really important to make sure that we actually work as a team. It's much easier for parents to work together and agree on how they're going to actually manage some of those misbehaviours. And if you've got a new strategy that you'd like to try, perhaps have a conversation together around how that might look or any changes that the other person might have, and really make sure you guys are having some conversations about any disagreements that you're having around discipline or behaviour management and how to manage the child's behaviour. We want to make sure that you avoid arguments in front of a child. All adults do have disagreements, and that's pretty normal, but it can be really upsetting for the child if they're actually seeing any of that argument or fighting or disagreements. So if there's any problems going on between you guys as parents or caregivers, deal with that when the child's not there. Making sure you get support. Everyone needs help and support to raise their children. So call on partners or friends or family or neighbours. They're really good people that you can call on to talk about ideas and maybe even compare some experiences that you might be having. And have a break. You know, all parents need to have time away from their children, and that's okay, and it's normal. You know, if you give plenty of attention and quality time with your child, and particularly those 10 minutes, 5 days of the week, you know, it's not going to harm your child to have a break every now and again. And it'll make you feel better if you can leave them with someone that you trust. So have quality time with your children, so it's okay to have time away. So you get to have your break as well. So here's a little summary of what we've talked about today, these 4 different areas. So we've talked about positive parenting, making sure we have safe and interesting environments for our children, a positive learning space, using assertive discipline, those realistic expectations, and making sure you're taking care of yourself as a parent. Helping our children to actually develop. So, you know, why are they doing what they're doing? How am I contributing to this? What can I do differently? And how can I spend quality time with my child? And then if we need to, managing those misbehaviours, making sure we've got clear rules, rewards and consequences. And if you want your child to do something, then we can ask twice. But if you want your child to stop something, we're only asking them to do it once before the consequences are put in place. And whether that's logical consequences, quiet time or time out. And the last section that I rushed through, sorry guys, planning ahead, being prepared for high risk situations for both you and the child. Okay. So there's a couple of little links here. So if you want more information about Triple P, there's a section here about the benefits and evidence around it. There's a link there on the slide. And I also want to let you know that the Triple P program is actually free for all Queenslanders. It's been free for all Queenslanders for a number of years, and I believe the Australian government has also just announced some free online training for all parents across the country. So there is a link, or you can just jump in and Google Triple P online, free, and there's some options that pop up there for you. So if you want some more information, that's the place to go. And guys, that's the end of my presentation. I know I'm probably a little over in my time, but if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thanks, Suzie. What should your child be doing once you have given them a consequence? Example, you have taken their game for 5 minutes.
So that's always interesting, isn't it, around what we can do? It's a really lovely question, because it's what do you do with the child in that 5 minutes when you take the game away? So I guess there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, you can actually just take them away from the situation and distract them to do a different activity. Or you can actually still, like, you can take the toy or the activity away that's at the center of the problem, but the child can still stay in that same location, and they might just pick something else up, or they may just engage with the sibling in a different way or a better way when that particular toy is no longer at the center of the problem, and they may then just collect a different toy or an activity to do. And I guess it's just about repeating what the family rule is that they need to be doing. We share when we sit down here on the carpet together, or let's make sure we're keeping our hands and feet to ourselves, or whatever it is the rule that was breaking at the time when you put the consequence in place.
Next question, what happens if they start misbehaving or acting out during quiet time or timeout? Do you reset the clock on the 1 minute duration? And if yes, what happens if they repeatedly break quiet time until you go past the maximum 5 minutes or so?
So it's not so much that it's a maximum of 5 minutes of staying in quiet time. It's just that it's a maximum of 5 minutes for 5 to 10-year-olds of being quiet. So if they're less than 5, and so the quiet time or the timeout is for 2 minutes, it's about making sure, and perhaps you can repeat the rule of your time will start when you're quiet. And you can keep repeating that, or often they might be arguing about it, and again, we don't want to get into the argument, but we can just reiterate that quiet time will start when you're quiet, or the timer will start when you're quiet. Does that answer that question? Did someone want to speak to that a little more?
Can we move to the next one? Thanks for the wonderful information. What do you do to manage the situation when the child throws a tantrum while leaving the park on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it, when they just want to stay and have some fun. I think sometimes it's about making sure you have some rules in place around what is the rule when it's time to leave the park. I think it's also really important to acknowledge with the child that I know you'd really like to stay and play, or I know you've been having some fun while you're here, but it's time to go home now. And I think that you can then create some quiet time if you need to do that. So perhaps, if you're going and popping them in the car, they can actually have their time out or their quiet time in the car. Obviously, it's about not going anywhere and making sure they've got good air and light supply in the car. But you can say to them, this is going to be your 1 minute quiet time or 1 minute time out, because the rule was we needed to be okay when we left the park and we needed to follow the instruction.
Next question. At what age is it realistic to start doing this? Example, a 3-month-old baby is obviously too young to understand they are misbehaving, but how old is old enough to be taught about the right way to behave, rules, consequences, etc.?
I think it's actually just a standard thing that you can do even from a really young age, is just reinforcing what the rules are. So, you're right, 3 months is really young. I don't think there's a set age, because there are different things and different rules that you might have. You could certainly have an 18-month-old that might be throwing Lego across the lounge room floor or something. You can certainly have a rule in place right from the beginning that says we don't throw things inside. We keep things, we can drop things perhaps, we don't throw things. And so from a young age, you can start reinforcing that these are the rules of the house, and you can then have some of those consequences in place. I guess it's probably about 2 if we want to put an age group on it. And I guess when we think about those time frames that have been put in place by Triple P, they're certainly saying that 1 minute for a 2-year-old. That's probably a good place to start, but there's no reason why you can't have the rules in place and at least just keep reiterating it to the child. And you can also do rewards from a really young age. And sometimes those rewards, they don't have to be material things. They can just be a hug or a good girl or a good boy, or just some really lovely praise.
Yeah, I've got a question just with regards to like timeout. When a child's not ready to go and sit in that safe space, and they just want to be I guess, next to you, whether it's because they don't want to separate at that time of emotion or trauma or misbehavior, to the point that, you know, you're just constantly returning them back to that safe space. They come out, you're returning them. They come out, you're returning them. At what point do we stick with that strategy, or do we employ a different consequence?
I think, you know, it has to be what works well for you. If you feel like that's just not working for you, then stop doing it. Pick something different. If they don't want to be separated and your value is about staying connected with them, perhaps it can even be a little bit about, well, you know what, I'm going to sit on the other side of this wall and we'll do it together.
Okay, yeah. Thank
if you'd
you.
like to do it that way. Yeah. Are there any other questions on the chat? Great. Well, guys, thank you so much for being part of my presentation today. I hope that was helpful for you. You know, I've put my contact details on there, but I'm not located in Brisbane, so I can't necessarily do any, you know, face-to-face support for you guys down there, but I certainly do some online support for parents. So if anyone likes to make contact with me, you're very welcome to. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Suzie.